Okay, so today's notes are on polynomials, and we're looking at the operations of polynomials of addition and subtraction. So make sure you copy down the heading to be able to put these in your notes. So addition. Step 1 is to rewrite the expression without parentheses. Because addition doesn't change the signs of anything inside the parentheses, a positive times a negative is still a negative, a positive times a positive is still a positive. It's not going to change anything. So basically you can just rewrite it and ignore those parentheses. Step 2 is to identify like terms. So just a little reminder that like terms have the same variables and exponents. And so if the variable is an x to the third, then you have to find another one that has exactly x to the third. They should be identical into what the variables are in their combination. Now note, x to the third y is the same thing as yx to the third. But it is not the same thing as y to the third x. So notice that difference, because sometimes the book will, or any of your assignments, will try to mess you up with that. But x to the third y and x to the third y are like terms, as is y to the x third. So just some brief little examples. So once you have that, if you want to, you can rearrange and rewrite the like terms so they are next to each other. If that makes it easier for you, then that's perfectly fine, and a lot of times books like to be able to explain it that way and group them together before you actually combine them. For me, I just like to underline them and then add them accordingly, or some people put squares or circles or triangles around them. For me, I just do single dash underlines or double dash underlines and then add. But you can rewrite them next to each other, but make sure you include their signs. If it's a negative 7x, then when you rewrite it or move it anywhere, it needs to still be a negative 7x. So take the sign with it. Once you have identified your like terms, you need to combine your like terms. And that means adding and subtracting your coefficient. And so remember, your coefficient is your number in front, whatever it happens to be. That tells you how many of those type of variables you have. If you have 2x squared, if you have 5x squares, if you have negative 16x squares, it tells you how many you have. So when you're adding or subtracting your coefficients, you're going to be directly affecting how many x squares you have. So, and a note, a very important thing, the exponents don't change. Since it's just addition and subtraction, you're not going to change what you have in terms of the exponents. Only the coefficients. Very significant area to note. Number 4, write the answer with decreasing exponents if needed. And what that means with the if needed is if you haven't already written it that way after you get through adding and subtracting, then do so. Often I find by time I go through and add, I usually add all my x squared, my largest exponents together first anyways, and work my way down. So I don't have to rewrite it. But if you didn't for whatever reason, then that's fine. Just make sure that your final answer is rewritten with descending exponents. So here is the example that we have. We have an addition of two binomials. And my step 1 says to rewrite it. So I did. Without parentheses, that basically they just drop. Do note that here, if you wanted to, you could write this as plus negative x squared with your negative x squared in parentheses, or you can just say positive times a negative is a negative. So that's up to you. If you wish to put plus negative x squared, you are welcome to do so. Step 2 is to identify your like terms, and so as you can see, I group mine with underlines. Sometimes you can have blank options, and you just do blank, blank, and then 1 and 1. However and whatever works for you, as long as you are able to identify it. And notice I try to include the sign when I underline them. And that's just a visual reminder that when I combine them, I'm going to be applying that sign with it. Whatever it happens to be, it's going to be that positive or negative accordingly. So step 3 is to combine like terms. So I had my 3x plus 4x, and I got my 7x. I had my 2x squared and my negative 1x squared. So I have it. And step 4, if needed, is to rewrite them in descending or decreasing exponents. All right. So I'm going to move the paper up. So subtraction. And what you're going to find is subtraction is going to add a few extra steps, but other than that, it's going to follow basically the addition, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. So step 1 is to realize that when you have a negative or a subtraction of a parentheses, whether it's a monomial, a single x, a binomial has 2 terms, trinomials with 3 terms, whatever it is, that negative number, that subtraction sign, means times negative 1. And that is important to note because you have to recognize that in order to be able to complete this operation correctly, is that this is actually an invisible 1 here, and that the number 1 is actually being multiplied by your x or whatever is inside the parentheses. So once you realize that, and if you want to, you can draw it in. Sometimes you can write in your invisible 1 or put in the little times dot. Then you're going to distribute the negative 1 to every term inside of the parentheses. This is also very important because a lot of times people have a tendency to multiply only like the first one or maybe even the first 2, but for whatever reason, forget about distributing it to the last term inside the parentheses. Every single term inside the parentheses has to be multiplied by negative 1, which initially means change their sign. So if it's positive, turn it negative. If it's negative, turn it positive. So once you have done that, now step 3 is to follow the same steps as addition. So that is it. Subtraction is different from addition by adding these 2 extra steps at the very beginning, which is recognizing that you're multiplying by negative 1, and then do so. Multiply by everything by negative 1. After that, you're just going to go back to rewriting the expression without parentheses. You're going to identify your like terms. You're going to combine those like terms, and if need be, you are going to rewrite it with decreasing exponents. So an example of that we have here. So we have our example. Step 1 is to identify, and if you want to, you can put a little dot here to indicate that it's going to be multiplied by negative 1. And step 2 is to distribute that negative 1 to every term inside those parentheses. Again, if it's a binomial, like we have here, a trinomial, whatever, whatnot, however many you distribute it. Which means change the signs. Please note and remember this would have been a positive 2x squared, so that's why it became a negative. So once I have done that, step 3 says go back to rewriting the expressions without exponents, identify your like terms, combine like terms, and if you see here, I've already wrote it in decreasing order, so I don't need to rewrite it. Again, underlining to take the sign with it, that this is a negative 2x, so I subtracted it and got my negative 2x squared and got my 3x squared. And obviously those type of sign operations play into it. All right, so that is adding and subtracting with polynomials. I hope this helped.